A lonely millionaire took his assistant to a ball. His friends mocked him. Until she walked in. Before we begin the story, tell us where you are watching from, in the comment section. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across David Richardson's dining table, illuminating two place settings that had remained untouched for months. He sat alone at the head of the mahogany table, mechanically cutting through a steak that tasted like cardboard, while his phone buzzed incessantly with social invitations he had no desire to accept. At 35, David had built an empire that Forbes celebrated and competitors envied. Richardson Holdings owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and his penthouse apartment showcased every luxury imaginable. Yet, as he stared at the empty chair across from him, the one he'd optimistically kept set for 3 years, the silence felt heavier than the crystal above his head. Mr. Richardson. The soft voice belonged to Luna Martinez, his executive assistant of 2 years. She stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, her dark hair pulled back in its usual professional bun. Even after working late, her white blouse remained crisp, though David noticed she'd worn the same navy blazer for the 3rd time this week. The Morrison files are ready for your review. And I've confirmed your meeting with the Japanese investors for Monday morning. She paused, studying his untouched meal. Should I tell the kitchen staff to prepare smaller portions? It seems wasteful to Luna. David's voice was quieter than usual. Do you ever get lonely? The question hung in the air like smoke. Luna's grip tightened on her tablet, and for a moment, her professional composure flickered. She'd worked for demanding executives before, but David had never asked her anything personal. I suppose everyone does sometimes, Mr. Richardson. David nodded, pushing his plate away. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled below, millions of lights representing millions of lives, all of them somehow more connected than his own. What do you think makes someone truly wealthy? Money or meaningful connections? Share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, across the city, Luna's studio apartment could have fit inside David's walk-in closet, but every inch was purposeful. Books lined makeshift shelves constructed from milk crates, their spines bearing titles on business strategy, art history, and classic literature. A small desk by the window held her laptop, surrounded by carefully organized bills, and a framed photo of her parents at their restaurant in Queens. She kicked off her one heels and rubbed her feet, still feeling the phantom ache of another 12-hour day. The blazer went on its designated hanger, one of only 2 she owned, alternated throughout the week. Her reflection in the mirror showed tired eyes behind practical glasses, but also something else. Intelligence that her humble circumstances couldn't diminish. Luna heated leftover soup while reviewing her evening ritual, checking job postings for positions that might finally match her MBA, which she'd earned through night classes while working full-time. She'd been David's assistant for 2 years, watching him command boardrooms and negotiate million-dollar deals, all while sensing something hollow behind his success. The irony wasn't lost on her. She managed his schedule, knew his coffee preferences, handled his most confidential business matters, yet he barely saw her as a person. She was furniture with a heartbeat, professional wallpaper that efficiently managed his world. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, still working for Mr. Prince Charming. When are you going to find someone who sees you? Luna smiled sadly, stirring her soup. Maria meant well, but she couldn't understand the complexity of Luna's situation. David wasn't cruel or dismissive, he was simply absent, polite but distant, successful but somehow adrift. As she prepared for bed in her quiet apartment, Luna wondered if successful people were capable of genuine loneliness, or if money insulated them from such ordinary human emotions. She'd seen David's empty office on weekends, noticed how he never mentioned friends or family, observed the way he sometimes stared out his window as if searching for something beyond the skyline. Tomorrow would bring another day of managing his empire while remaining invisible in his world. But tonight, in the honesty of her solitude, Luna admitted to herself what she'd never spoken aloud. She cared about her enigmatic boss more than any assistant should, and the professional boundary between them felt both necessary and impossibly lonely. The city hummed outside her window, the same city David observed from 40 floors higher, both of them gazing at the same stars from vastly different worlds, neither knowing that their separate loneliness was about to collide in ways that would transform everything. The Whitmore Foundation's annual charity ball was society's most exclusive event, a glittering battlefield where old money flexed and new money fought for acceptance. David stared at the embossed invitation on his desk, feeling the familiar weight of obligation pressing against his chest. "Luna, cancel my appearance at the Whitmore ball," he said without looking up from his morning reports. She paused in organizing his schedule, her pen hovering over the calendar. "Sir, you're the keynote sponsor. Your absence would generate exactly the kind of gossip those vultures feast on." David rubbed his temples. "Fine. Confirm my attendance. Solo. Would you like me to arrange for Miss Cartwright to accompany you?" Luna's voice remained professionally neutral, though something flickered in her expression. Vivian Cartwright was the type of woman who looked perfect on paper, pedigreed, photogenic, and utterly vapid. God no, David's response was sharper than intended. That woman treats conversation like a competitive sport she's determined to lose. Luna bit back a smile. "I'll inform them you're attending alone." David watched her make the notation, studying the efficient way she managed his life. In her simple white blouse and that same navy blazer, she possessed a quiet competence that made his world function seamlessly. When had he stopped seeing her as just an assistant and started noticing the way she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating? Actually, the words escaped before his rational mind could intervene. "Would you like to go with me?" Luna's pen slipped, leaving an ink mark across his pristine calendar. "I'm sorry, what?" "The ball. Tomorrow night." "As my..." David hesitated, suddenly uncertain of his own motives. "As my guest." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Luna's dark eyes searched his face for signs of jest or pity, finding neither. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her pen. "Mr. Richardson, I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't possibly. Why not?" David leaned forward, surprising himself with his earnestness. "You know more about my business than most board members. You're intelligent, articulate. I don't belong in that world." Luna's voice was barely above a whisper. "Those people, they'd take one look at me and see exactly what I am. Your assistant. Someone who doesn't belong." David felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "Those people are pompous idiots who inherited their relevance. You've earned everything you have." Luna stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. "I need to think about this, of course. Take your time." But even as Luna retreated to her desk, David's phone was already buzzing with messages. Word traveled fast in their social circle, faster than wildfire. More destructive than gossip had any right to be. Text from Richard Whitmore. "Heard you're bringing your secretary to my ball. Brave choice, old man." Text from Vivian Cartwright. "David, darling, surely you can't be serious about bringing the help. What will people think?" Text from Jonathan Hayes. "Richardson's lost it. Bringing his assistant to Whitmore's. This should be entertaining." David's jaw clenched as each message arrived. He'd forgotten how quickly his world could turn predatory, how efficiently his supposed friends could sharpen their knives. But something had shifted in him when he'd seen Luna's face the way she'd automatically assumed she wasn't worthy. The resignation in her voice when she spoke of not belonging through his office's glass wall. He watched Luna at her desk, staring at her computer screen without typing. Her usual composure had cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. For 2 years, she'd been the invisible force that kept his life organized, never asking for recognition, never expecting more than her paycheck. When had she become more than furniture to him? When had he started noticing the way she bit her lip when concentrating, or how her rare smiles transformed her entire face? "Do you believe we sometimes need someone to push us out of our comfort zones to discover our true worth? What's your experience with taking unexpected chances?" His phone rang. Richard Whitmore himself. "David, what's this nonsense about bringing your assistant? You know I adore you like a brother. But really, her name is Luna Martinez." David's voice carried a steel that surprised them both. "And she'll be my guest tomorrow evening." "Oh, come now. This is clearly some midlife crisis acting out. Bring Vivian or that lovely Hampton girl. Someone appropriate." David ended the call without responding. But the damage was already spreading through their social ecosystem like poison. By afternoon, Luna had fielded 6 calls from society reporters, each fishing for details about Richardson's charity case date. She stood in his office doorway at closing time, her professional mask firmly in place, but her eyes betraying hurt. "Perhaps we should reconsider this arrangement, Mr. Richardson. I don't want to cause you embarrassment." David looked up from his computer, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as his efficient assistant, but as Luna, brilliant, dignified, and far too good for the wolves circling tomorrow night. "They're afraid of you," he said quietly. "Excuse me." "My friends." They're terrified that someone might see past their inherited titles and trust funds to who they really are. But you, David stood, moving closer than their professional relationship typically allowed. You've never needed a pedigree to command respect. Yuna's breath caught as he stopped just inches away, close enough that she could smell his cologne. See the sincerity in his eyes. "One night," he said softly. Give us one night to show them what real worth looks like." Her reflection stared back from his office window plain. Practical Yuna Martinez, who managed schedules and filed reports. But in David's eyes, she saw something she'd never dared imagine. Possibility. "Okay," she whispered. One night, neither of them could have predicted that this single word would set in motion events that would shatter everything they thought they knew about themselves, each other, and the treacherous world they were about to face together. Yuna stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror at M, her mind replaying David's invitation on an endless loop. The rational part of her brain, the part that had survived corporate politics and climbed from poverty through pure determination, screamed warnings like a fire alarm. "What are you thinking? You're his assistant. He pays your salary. This is professional suicide." But another voice, quieter and more dangerous, whispered different possibilities. The way he'd looked at her when he said she commanded respect. The protective edge in his voice when he defended her to Richard Whitmore. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Mija, you haven't answered my calls. What's wrong?" Yuna typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on. "Just work stuff. Talk tomorrow." How could she explain that her boss, a man who existed in a stratosphere so far above her own that their world should never intersect, had asked her to be his date to the most exclusive social event of the year? How could she admit that for one insane moment, she'd actually considered saying yes? She pulled up Google images of previous Whitmore Foundation balls. Women draped in designer gowns that cost more than Yuna's annual rent, dripping with jewelry that could fund a small country. They moved through those gilded spaces like they owned the air itself, born into a confidence Yuna had never possessed. "You'll be a curiosity at best," she told herself. "A charity case he's parading around to make himself feel noble." But even as she tried to convince herself David's motives were patronizing, she couldn't forget the vulnerability she'd glimpsed in his question. "Do you ever get lonely?" For a moment, his careful composure had cracked, revealing someone as isolated as she was, despite all his advantages. Meanwhile, across town, David paced his penthouse like a caged animal, second-guessing every word of their exchange. His phone continued buzzing with increasingly creative insults from his social circle, each message reinforcing what he already knew. Bringing Yuna to the ball was social suicide. Text from Margaret Sinclair. "David, darling, I hear you're bringing your secretary as some kind of social experiment. How very progressive of you." Text from Henry Ashworth. "Richardson, you can't be serious about this assistant business. Think of your reputation." Missed call from Vivian Cartwright 7. David poured himself a scotch and stood at his window, looking out at the city lights that had once represented endless possibility, but now felt like prison bars. When had his life become so small? When had he started measuring his worth by the approval of people he didn't even like? The truth he couldn't admit, even to himself, was that Yuna had become the brightest part of his days. Her quiet intelligence, the way she solved problems before he knew they existed, the rare occasions when her professional mask slipped and he glimpsed the passionate woman underneath these moments had become precious to him. But asking her to the ball, that was madness. He was David Richardson, heir to a real estate empire, featured on magazine covers and society pages. She was his employee, brilliant, but from a different world entirely. The gulf between them wasn't just about money, it was about everything his world would never let him forget. His scotch burned as he considered calling her, fabricating some excuse to withdraw the invitation. It would be kinder to both of them, save her from the humiliation and himself from the spectacle. But then he remembered the moment when she'd whispered okay, the trust in her voice, the way she'd looked at him like he might actually be worth taking a chance on. "You're a coward," he told himself. 48 hours ago, you were desperate enough for genuine human connection to ask your assistant on a date, and now you're going to abandon her because Richard Whitmore thinks it's beneath you. The next morning, Yuna arrived at the office early, hoping to establish normalcy before facing David. She'd rehearsed a professional speech about maintaining appropriate boundaries and reconsidering their arrangement. She would be gracious but firm, practical but not wounded. David was already at his desk, studying contracts with unusual intensity. Neither of them acknowledged the elephant in the room for the first 2 hours. "Mr. Richardson," Luna finally said, standing in his doorway with coffee and carefully constructed resolve. "About yesterday's conversation, I've been thinking the same thing." David's words came out rushed, like he was ripping off a bandage. "It was inappropriate of me to put you in that position. We should forget the whole thing." Luna felt something crack inside her chest, relief mixed with disappointment, so sharp it took her breath away. "Of course. That's probably for the best. Absolutely. Professional boundaries are important. Very important." They stared at each other across the space of his office, both nodding with forced conviction while something precious died between them. "I'll call the Whitmore Foundation and inform them you'll be attending alone," Luna said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "Perfect. Thank you." Luna turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "For what it's worth, Mr. Richardson, I think your friends underestimate you." David looked up sharply. "What do you mean? Anyone who thinks you need their approval to make your own choices doesn't really know you at all." She left him staring after her, words hanging in the air like a challenge neither of them was brave enough to accept. "What do you think stops us from taking chances on people who might surprise us? Have you ever let fear talk you out of something that could have been beautiful?" The rest of the day passed in careful professional politeness, both of them dancing around the invisible wound they'd inflicted on themselves. By evening, Luna had convinced herself she'd dodged a bullet. David had persuaded himself he'd made the mature choice. Neither of them slept well that night, lying awake in their separate beds, wondering if they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. But fate, as it often does, was preparing to give them one more chance to choose courage over comfort. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisis that turns millionaires into humble supplicants. David's phone rang at 6 a.m. His largest investor, Kenji Nakamura, calling from Tokyo with news that made David's blood run cold. "Richardson-san, I arrive in New York tonight for emergency meeting. The Sakura Tower project, there are complications." David sat up in bed, instantly alert. The Sakura Tower was his flagship development, a $2 billion mixed-use complex that represented 5 years of planning and negotiations. If Nakamura was flying to New York unannounced, something was catastrophically wrong. "What kind of complications, Kenji?" "Better discussed in person." "I land at JFK at PM. We meet immediately." The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone in the pure dawn darkness. He needed Luna, her meticulous organization, her ability to anticipate problems 3 moves ahead, her calm presence in the eye of corporate storms. Bym. Luna was already at her desk when David burst through the office doors, still adjusting his tie. "Nakamura's coming tonight. Emergency meeting." David's words came in sharp bursts as he paced. "I need all the Sakura files, the environmental impact reports, the zoning documentation, everything." Luna's fingers flew across her keyboard without hesitation, their personal awkwardness forgotten in the face of crisis. "Done. I'll have everything organized within the hour. Should I cancel your evening appointments?" "Everything. Clear my entire weekend if necessary." David stopped pacing, looking directly at her for the first time since yesterday's conversation. "Luna, I need to ask you something, and I know it's complicated given." Yesterday, she looked up from her computer, wariness flickering in her dark eyes. "Tenji doesn't speak much English. His interpreter usually handles business meetings, but she's not arriving until Monday." "You speak Japanese?" Luna blinked, surprised. "I studied it in college, but I'm hardly fluent. You're fluent enough. I've heard you on calls with our Tokyo contractors." David's voice carried a desperate edge. "I need you there tonight, as my translator, nothing more. Pure business." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. 24 hours ago, he'd asked her to accompany him to a social event, and she'd nearly said yes before they both retreated into safety. Now he needed her professionally, and the request felt both easier and impossibly complicated. "Of course, Mr. Richardson, whatever you need." But as Luna coordinated the crisis response, she couldn't ignore the way David kept glancing at her, or how their usual professional rhythm had shifted into something more intimate. They worked in synchronized efficiency, but underneath the business urgency lay the unresolved tension of what they'd almost been to each other. That evening, the meeting location was David's private conference room on the 40th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. Luna had changed into her most formal outfit, a charcoal grey dress she reserved for important meetings. Paired with her grandmother's simple pearl necklace, Kenji Nakamura arrived precisely at p.m. Accompanied by two associates and an air of barely contained urgency. Luna rose to greet them in careful, formal Japanese. Watching Nakamura's surprise transform into approval, "Your assistant speaks our language beautifully," he said to David in accented English. Then switched to rapid Japanese directed at Luna for the next 3 hours. Luna became David's lifeline. She translated not just words but cultural nuances. The subtle implications behind Nakamura's concerns about environmental protesters, local political pressure, and shifting market conditions in Tokyo. David found himself watching Luna with new respect as she navigated complex business terminology in both languages. He'd known she was intelligent, but seeing her handle international negotiations with such grace revealed depths he'd never imagined. "Martinez-san," Nakamura said during a brief break, addressing Luna directly in Japanese. "You understand business very well. Have you considered working in international development?" Luna flushed, translating the compliment for David before responding modestly in Japanese that she was happy in her current position. "He's impressed with you," David said quietly when Nakamura stepped out to take a call. "Hell, I'm impressed with you. Where did you learn to speak Japanese like that?" "Night classes at NYU while I was getting my MBA," Luna replied, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. "I thought it might be useful for international business. You have an MBA?" David stared at her. "I never knew. Why didn't you tell me?" Luna's smile held a hint of sadness. "You never asked, Mr. Richardson." The words hit him like a physical blow. For 2 years, she'd sat outside his office, managing his world with quiet competence, and he'd never bothered to learn anything about her beyond her professional capabilities. She had dreams, ambitions, qualifications he'd never bothered to discover. "Luna, Mr. Nakamura is returning," she said softly. But not before David caught something vulnerable in her expression. The meeting resumed, stretching past midnight as they worked through potential solutions to the Sakura Tower crisis. Luna's translations became more than linguistic. She helped David understand the cultural context behind Nakamura's concerns, suggesting compromises that honored both American business practices and Japanese values. Bym. They'd reached a tentative agreement that would save the project. Nakamura shook hands with David, then bowed formally to Luna. "Your assistant is remarkable," he said in English. "You are fortunate to have someone so capable." After the Japanese delegation left, David and Luna stood alone in the conference room, exhaustion settling over them like a blanket. The city sparkled below, and for a moment, the professional crisis that had brought them together felt less important than the personal revelation it had created. "Thank you," David said quietly. "Tonight, you saved my company." Luna began gathering papers, her movements careful and controlled. "Just doing my job, Mr. Richardson." No, David moved closer, his voice carrying new conviction. "Tonight, you did far more than any job description could cover, and I realize I've been a fool." Luna looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. "I asked you to the ball for the wrong reasons," David continued. "I thought I was being generous, giving you a chance to enter my world. But tonight, I realize something: you don't need my world. Luna, you've been building your own all along, and I've been too blind to see it." The vulnerability in his voice made Luna's hands tremble as she set down the documents. "What are you saying?" David stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The way the evening had stripped away his usual composure. "I'm saying that ball invitation. I want to ask again. Not because I'm being charitable, but because I'd be honored if someone as remarkable as you would give me another chance. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought you knew well was actually a complete surprise? Sometimes the people closest to us have depths we never bothered to explore." Luna's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked into David's face, seeing something there she'd never dared hope for: respect, admiration, and something that looked dangerously like the beginning of love. "The ball is tomorrow night," she whispered. "I know." David's smile was tentative but real. "Crazy timing, right?" Luna thought about her empty apartment, her careful routines, the safe life she'd built that suddenly felt too small to contain the possibility standing in front of her. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger this time. "Let's give them something to really talk about." Saturday morning light filtered through David's penthouse windows as Luna sat cross-legged on his Italian leather sofa. surrounded by fabric swatches and magazine clippings. She looked impossibly small in his vast living space, like a sparrow who'd accidentally flown into a palace. "I can't do this," Luna said for the third time in an hour, staring at images of ball gowns that cost more than her monthly rent. "David, look at me. Really look at me." David glanced up from his laptop where he'd been researching formal wear boutiques that could accommodate same-day alterations. What he saw made his chest tighten. Luna in her weekend clothes, faded jeans, and an NYU sweatshirt that had seen better days, looking lost and overwhelmed. "I see you," he said quietly. "What do you see when you look at yourself?" Luna's laugh held no humor. "I see a girl from Queens whose father fixes cars and whose mother cleans office buildings at night. I see someone who shops at Target and considers Olive Garden a fancy dinner. I see." Stop. David closed his laptop and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "Tell me about them." "Your parents." Luna's expression softened despite her anxiety. "Papa came from Mexico with nothing but the clothes on his back and a toolbox his father gave him. Mama followed 6 months later with my grandmother. His wedding ring sewn into the hem of her dress, the only valuable thing she owned. She picked up one of the fabric swatches silk that probably cost more per yard than her father made in a week. They worked 3 jobs each so I could go to college. Mama would come home from her night shift cleaning offices, sleep for 4 hours, then go to her day job at the laundromat. Papa worked at the garage during the day and drove taxi at night." David found himself leaning forward, captivated by the quiet pride in Luna's voice despite her current distress. "When I got my MBA, Papa cried. Not because he was proud, though he was, but because he was afraid I'd forget where I came from. That success would make me ashamed of them." "Are you?" David asked gently. "Ashamed?" Luna's eyes flashed. "Never. They're the strongest, most honorable people I know." "But David, your world." She gestured at the marble countertops, the original artwork, the cashmere throw pillows. "This isn't just about money. It's about breeding, connections, the right schools, the right families." "I don't have any of that." David was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. "You want to know about the right families? About breeding?" David stood and walked to his bar, but instead of pouring a drink, he picked up a silver-framed photograph Luna had never noticed before. It showed a much younger David with an elegant blonde woman and a distinguished older man. "My father, Harrison Richardson, built this company from nothing. Started as a construction worker, saved every penny, bought his first property when he was 25. David's fingers traced the frame. "My mother, Catherine, was a secretary in his first office building. She fell in love with his ambition, and he fell in love with her kindness." Luna watched David's face transform as he spoke, professional polish giving way to something raw and painful. They were happy for exactly 5 years. Then my father's business took off, and suddenly we had money, real money. My mother tried to fit into the society world that came with success, but she was never accepted. The established family saw her as new money trash with working-class roots. David set down the photograph, his jaw tight. "She started drinking to cope with the constant rejection. By the time I was 10, she was attending charity lunches drunk and making scenes at country club events. The society pages called her Harrison Richardson's unfortunate choice." Luna's hand flew to her throat, understanding dawning in her dark eyes. "My father," instead of defending her, started distancing himself. He was embarrassed by her failures to fit in. He'd attend events alone, telling people she was indisposed. David's voice turned bitter. "She died when I was 16. Officially, it was an accident. She fell down the marble stairs after a charity gala. Unofficially, everyone knew she'd been drinking because some society matron had publicly humiliated her about her grammar." "David," Luna whispered. But he wasn't finished. "After the funeral, my father sat me down and gave me the only advice he ever offered about relationships. Marry within your class, son. Love is a luxury we can't afford." David turned to face Luna, his eyes blazing with old pain. "I've spent 20 years following that advice. Dating appropriate women, attending appropriate events, living an appropriately empty life." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Until I met a woman who speaks 3 languages, and an MBA while working full-time, and can handle international negotiations better than my Harvard-educated lawyers. A woman whose parents sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, who honors them instead of running from them." Luna felt tears threatening. overwhelmed by the trust David had shown in sharing his deepest wound. "Your mother," she said softly. "What was she like before?" David's smile was sad but genuine. "She made the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever tasted. She read me bedtime stories with different voices for every character. She taught me that wealth means nothing if you can't share it with people you love." He paused. "She would have adored you. What do you think shapes us more where we come from, or where we choose to go? Sometimes our greatest strengths come from our deepest struggles." Luna stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that held both their stories, his of loss and loneliness, hers of determination and dreams deferred. "I am terrified," she admitted, "not of your friend's judgment, but of disappointing you, of not being enough." David came up behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Luna, look at me." She turned, and he cupped her face gently in his hands. "My mother wasn't enough for my father's world because he let their opinions matter more than her worth. I won't make that mistake." His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You're not just enough, Luna. You're extraordinary. And tomorrow night, I want the whole world to see what I've been lucky enough to discover." Luna searched his face, seeing not the polished executive, but the lonely boy who'd lost his mother to a world that valued pedigree over heart. In that moment, she understood that they weren't from different worlds at all. They were both survivors of dreams that had been nearly crushed by other people's expectations. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "Let's show them what extraordinary looks like." David's smile was radiant as he pulled her close, both of them finally brave enough to believe they deserved the love that had been growing between them all along. The transformation would begin in a few hours. But the real change had already started. Two wounded souls choosing to heal each other instead of hiding from the possibility of more pain. The boutique on Fifth Avenue looked like something from a fairy tale. All crystal chandeliers and silk-draped mannequins. Luna stood frozen in the entrance, clutching David's arm with white knuckles as the impeccably dressed sales associate approached with the kind of smile reserved for customers whose credit cards had no limits. "Mr. Richardson," the woman purred. "I'm Isabel. We spoke on the phone, and this must be the lovely lady who needs our special attention." Luna felt heat rise in her cheeks at the barely concealed condescension, but David's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "This is Luna Martinez," he said with quiet authority. "She's attending the Whitmore Foundation ball tonight, and she deserves nothing less than perfection." Isabel's smile became more genuine as she studied Luna with professional eyes. "Of course. Follow me, dear. We have some magnificent pieces that will complement your coloring beautifully for the next 2 hours." Luna found herself in a surreal world of silk and satin, being draped with fabrics that cost more than her monthly salary. David sat in a plush armchair, offering gentle encouragement and vetoing anything that made Luna look uncomfortable. "Try this one," Isabel suggested, holding up a stunning midnight blue gown with delicate beading. "The color will make your eyes absolutely luminous." Luna disappeared into the fitting room, and when she emerged, David's breath caught audibly. The dress hugged her curves like it had been designed specifically for her body, the deep blue making her skin glow and her dark hair shine like silk. "Luna," David breathed, rising from his chair, "you're breathtaking." But Luna was staring at herself in the three-way mirror with an expression of wonder and terror. "I don't look like me. You look like yourself," David said, moving to stand behind her. "Just revealed." Isabel clapped her hands together. "It's perfect. Now for shoes, jewelry, and hair." "Wait." Luna turned to face David, vulnerability written across her features. "This dress costs $8,000. I looked at the tag. Luna, I can't let you buy me an $8,000 dress. It's too much. It changes things between us." David glanced at Isabel, who discreetly withdrew to give them privacy. He took Luna's hands, careful not to wrinkle the delicate fabric. "What if I told you this isn't about the money?" "Then I'd say you're lying, because everything tonight is about money. The ball, the charity, your friends, it's all about who has what and how much they're willing to spend to prove it." David was quiet for a moment, then smiled, not his polished business smile, but something softer and more real. "When I was 8, my mother took me shopping for my first tuxedo. I was going to be the ring bearer in my father's business partner's wedding." He adjusted the delicate strap on Luna's shoulder. "We went to 3 different stores, and at each one, my mother was treated like she didn't belong. Salespeople ignored her, made her wait, spoke to her like she was stupid." Luna's expression softened as she listened, Finally, we found this small tailor shop in Brooklyn. The owner, Mr. Petrov, treated my mother like a queen. He brought her tea, listened to her ideas, made me feel like the most important customer he'd ever had. David's eyes grew distant with the memory. The tuxedo cost twice what my father wanted to spend, but my mother bought it anyway. She said, "Sometimes, David, we pay not just for things, but for how people make us feel when we're buying them." He looked directly into Luna's eyes. "Today isn't about buying you a dress. It's about celebrating who you are, about giving you the kind of experience you deserve. It's about how I want you to feel when you walk into that ballroom." Luna felt tears threatening again. "And how do you want me to feel?" "Like the extraordinary woman I've been falling in love with for 2 years without realizing it." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying and beautiful. Luna's hand moved to her throat, fingers finding her grandmother's pearls. "You're falling in love with me," she whispered. David's smile was tender and uncertain. "I think I've been in love with you since the day you reorganized my entire filing system and left a note that said, 'Chaos is just order waiting to be discovered.' I just wasn't brave enough to admit it." Luna laughed despite her tears. "That's the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. And it's about filing. Everything about you is romantic to me. Luna, your intelligence, your kindness, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. How you always remember my coffee order even when I forget to say please. David." Luna's voice was barely audible. "I'm scared of what?" "Of wanting this too much. Of believing this is real and then losing it." She gestured at their reflection in the mirror, him in his perfect suit, her in a gown that transformed her into someone she barely recognized. "Of waking up tomorrow and realizing this was all just a beautiful dream." David cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then let's make sure you never have to wake up from it." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Luna saw her reflection again, but this time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw herself, Luna Martinez from Queens, wearing a dress that cost more than her father's monthly salary, being kissed by a millionaire who saw past her humble origins to the woman she'd always been inside. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger now. "Let's buy the dress. But first," she pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Mama, it's me. I need you to do something for me tonight." "Yes, I know it's Saturday. I need you to watch Channel 7 as Society page tomorrow morning. There's going to be a picture of your daughter at a fancy party." "No, Mama, I'm not in trouble. I'm happy." Finally, truly happy. Have you ever had someone see your worth before you could see it yourself? Sometimes love is just someone holding up a mirror and showing us who we really are. David watched Luna talk to her mother in rapid Spanish, her face glowing with excitement and love. In that moment, he realized that tomorrow's ball wasn't about proving anything to his judgmental friends. It was about celebrating the woman who'd been transforming his life one small moment at a time. Until one day, he'd looked up and realized his empty world had become full of possibility. The dress was perfect, but what made Luna beautiful had nothing to do with silk and beading. It was her courage, her integrity, her willingness to take a chance on love despite every reason to protect herself. Tonight, he was going to show her off to the world. Not as his assistant, not as his charity case, but as the woman who taught him that real wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with finding someone worth sharing your life with. The transformation was almost complete. But the real magic had already happened to hearts finally brave enough to admit they belonged together. The Whitmore Foundation Ballroom was a vision of old-world elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors while string quartets played Mozart in shadowed alcoves. Manhattan's elite moved through the space like jeweled fish in an aquarium. Their conversations a carefully orchestrated symphony of gossip, business, and social maneuvering. David and Luna arrived fashionably late, her transformation complete. The midnight blue gown hugged her curves like liquid starlight, while professional styling had swept her dark hair into an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings David had insisted on lending her. She looked breathtaking, and she knew it. "Ready?" David asked, offering his arm as they approached the entrance. Luna took a deep breath. Her fingers finding the small silver cross her grandmother had given her now nestled discreetly beneath the designer jewelry. "Ready." But as they entered the ballroom, Luna felt the weight of every gaze that turned their way. Conversations didn't stop, they shifted, becoming whispered assessments that followed their movement across the floor like shadows. "David, darling, Vivian Cartwright materialized in a cloud of champagne and expensive perfume, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "And this must be your assistant." She examined Luna like a scientist studying an interesting specimen. "How lovely that you've cleaned up so nicely, dear." Luna's training in corporate diplomacy kicked in. "Thank you, Miss Cartwright. You look beautiful as always." But Vivian's attention had already shifted back to David. "I saved you a seat at our table, David, though I'm not sure there's room for extra guests. Luna is my date, not my assistant tonight," David replied evenly. "We'll be sitting at my reserved table." Vivian's laugh was crystalline and cold. "Of course. How progressive of you." As they moved deeper into the crowd, similar encounters followed. Richard Whitmore's greeting was effusively polite and subtly condescending. Margaret Sinclair complimented Luna's brave fashion choices. Henry Ashworth asked David if he was conducting some sort of social experiment. Each interaction was a masterclass in cruelty wrapped in civility. Luna handled them all with grace. But David could see the tension building in the set of her shoulders, the way her smile became more forced with each passing moment. They found their table. David had paid extra to ensure it was prominently positioned near the dance floor. Luna excused herself to the ladies' room while David ordered champagne, and that's when the vultures truly descended. "Richardson, what are you trying to prove here?" Jonathan Hayes slid into Luna's vacant chair. "That money can turn a secretary into a socialite." "That girl is clearly lovely," Margaret Sinclair added. "But really, David, there's playing with fire and there's lighting yourself ablaze." David's jaw tightened. "Her name is Luna Martinez, and she's worth 10 of anyone in this room." "Oh, we're sure she's very capable," Vivian purred, having materialized again like an expensive ghost. "But darling, you can't seriously be thinking long term." "I mean, what would she talk about at dinner parties? Her parents' restaurant?" "Her father's a mechanic, actually," David said coldly. "And her mother cleans office buildings. Both jobs more honest than anything most of us have done." The silence that followed was loaded with ammunition. Richard Whitmore cleared his throat. "David, we're your friends. We're concerned about you. This woman is clearly intelligent and attractive, but she's also obviously after your money. It's written all over this transformation." David started to respond, but Luna's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore, I can speak for myself." She stood behind them, having returned from the ladies' room to find herself the subject of dissection. Her face was composed, but David could see the fury blazing in her dark eyes. "I apologize," Richard said with false courtesy. "We didn't realize you were there." Clearly, Luna moved to her chair, but didn't sit. "Please, don't let me interrupt your analysis of my motives and qualifications." The tension around the table was electric. David reached for Luna's hand, but she smoothly avoided his touch. "Luna," he began. "It's fascinating," Luna continued, her voice carrying the precision of a surgical scalpel. "How people who've never worked a day in their lives feel qualified to judge the integrity of those who have." Margaret Sinclair's face flushed. "Now, see here, no. You see here." Luna's professional composure finally cracked, revealing the passionate woman beneath. "You sit in your inherited wealth, spending money you didn't earn, attending charity balls to ease consciences you should be ashamed of, and you have the audacity to question my motives." The nearby tables had begun to notice the commotion. David could feel eyes turning their way, phones discreetly emerging to capture what was rapidly becoming a spectacle. "Luna, please." David stood, trying to defuse the situation. But Luna was beyond diplomacy now. 2 years of being invisible finally erupting into magnificent fury. "You want to know what I'm after? I'm after respect for the parents who sacrificed everything so I could earn the degrees that make me more qualified than half the people in this room. I'm after recognition for working 16-hour days to build something meaningful instead of coasting on family money. And yes, I'm after a man who sees my worth instead of just my usefulness." She turned to David, and he saw betrayal burning in her eyes. "But what I've found instead is someone who's so terrified of these people's opinions that he won't defend the woman he claims to love when she's being torn apart right in front of him." David felt the words like physical blows. "That's not how I was trying to. You were trying to manage the situation, to minimize the embarrassment, just like your father did with your mother." The comparison hit its mark with devastating accuracy. David's face went pale, and Una realized she'd gone too far. But the damage was already done. The entire ballroom had gone quiet. Society's finest leaning in to catch every word of what would undoubtedly become the scandal of the season. Una looked around at the sea of faces, some shocked, some delighted by the drama, all of them strangers who would never understand the courage it had taken her to be here tonight. This was a mistake, she said quietly, her anger dissolving into something worse, resignation. I don't belong here. I never did. She walked away with her head held high, leaving David standing among his so-called friends, finally understanding what his mother must have felt in her final, lonely moments. Sometimes our greatest fear isn't that we'll fail, but that we'll succeed and still not be accepted. Have you ever felt caught between who you are and who others expect you to be? The ballroom slowly returned to its normal hum, but David remained frozen, watching the woman he loved disappear through gilded doors, taking his heart and his last chance at genuine happiness with her. He'd had everything he thought he wanted: wealth, status, social acceptance, and in one devastating moment, he'd realized it was all worthless compared to what he'd just lost. David stood alone in the ballroom's golden light, surrounded by the people he'd once considered friends, feeling more isolated than he'd ever been in his life. The conversations around him had resumed their normal rhythm, but he could feel the undercurrent of whispered speculation, the delicious schadenfreude of watching David Richardson's social experiment explode spectacularly. Well, Vivian said, settling back into her chair with obvious satisfaction, I suppose that's over with. Really, David, you're better off. Can you imagine bringing someone like that to corporate events? David stared at the empty chair where Una had been sitting, still seeing the betrayal in her eyes when she'd realized he wouldn't defend her. The comparison to his father and mother echoed in his mind like a funeral bell. David? Richard Widmore's voice seemed to come from a great distance. Shall we order dinner? The Wellington here is supposed to be excellent. Something inside David snapped, not with anger, but with perfect, crystalline clarity. You know what? David turned to face the table full of expectant faces. You're all exactly the same people who destroyed my mother. The words fell into stunned silence. David, really, Margaret began. No, really. 20 years ago, you sat at tables just like this one, tearing apart a woman who didn't meet your standards. A woman who made the mistake of loving someone more than she loved herself. David's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of suppressed truth. She died alone and ashamed because people like you convinced her she wasn't worthy of belonging. Vivian's face had gone pale. That's hardly fair. What's not fair, David continued, is that I just watched the most extraordinary woman I've ever known walk away from me because I was too much of a coward to tell you all to go to hell. He pulled out his wallet and threw $1,000 on the table. Enjoy your dinner, and enjoy each other, because you deserve exactly the shallow, empty relationships you've all settled for. David walked away from the table, leaving behind shocked faces and 20 years of social expectations. But as he reached the ballroom's entrance, doubt crept in like poison. Una was gone. Her coat was no longer at the coat check, and the doorman confirmed she'd left in a taxi 15 minutes earlier. David stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel, Manhattan's glittering skyline mocking him with its cold beauty. He called her phone. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. This is Una Martinez. Please leave a message, and I'll return your call as soon as possible. Even her voicemail was professional, controlled, giving nothing away. Meanwhile, across the city, Una sat on her small couch in her studio apartment, still wearing the midnight blue gown that now felt like a costume from someone else's life. She'd kicked off the designer heels the moment she'd walked through her door, but couldn't bring herself to change out of the dress yet. It felt too much like admitting defeat. Her phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table, David's name flashing on the screen again and again. She turned off the ringer after the 5th call, but the silent vibrations were almost worse, each one a reminder of the choice she'd made to walk away. Maria had texted 3 times. Saw the news online. You okay? Coming over. News online. Una's stomach dropped as she opened her laptop and searched her name. The results made her feel sick. Richardson's secretary scandal. Charity ball meltdown. Caught on camera from rags to riches to raging. Assistant's public breakdown at elite event video. Watch David Richardson's date destroy her own Cinderella story. Someone had recorded her confrontation with David's friends. The video had already been shared hundreds of times, complete with commentary about gold diggers and knowing your place. The comment section was a cesspool of classist venom that made Yuna's chest tighten with shame. She closed the laptop and buried her face in her hands. This wasn't just professional suicide, it was public humiliation on a scale she'd never imagined possible. Her apartment felt smaller than ever, the silence pressing against her like a physical weight. Tomorrow, she'd have to face David at work if she still had a job. She'd have to pretend this night had never happened, that she hadn't told him she loved him, that she hadn't seen the look in his eyes when his friends had torn her apart and he'd done nothing to stop them. The worst part wasn't the humiliation or even the public scandal. It was the moment of hope she'd allowed herself to feel. For a few precious hours, she believed she could belong in his world. She believed he might actually choose her over the opinions of people who measured worth in pedigree and bank balances. Yuna stood and walked to her window, looking out at the modest neighborhood she'd grown up in, 2 miles and a universe away from the glittering world she'd just fled. This was real, the corner bodega, the fire escapes, the sound of traffic and late-night conversations in 3 different languages. This was home. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from David. Yuna, please. Let me explain. Let me fix this. Then another. I'm sorry. I was a coward tonight. But I'm not giving up on us. And another. You were right about everything. About my father, about my mother, about me. But you were wrong about one thing: you do belong. Not in their world, but in mine. In our world? If you let me prove it. Yuna stared at the messages, her heart warring with her head. David's words were beautiful, but words were easy. Actions were harder, and when it had mattered most, when she'd needed him to stand up for her, he'd hesitated just long enough for her to see the truth. Part of him was still the scared little boy, who'd learned that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and fighting for something that scared you? Sometimes the biggest risk is believing someone when they say they've changed. But as Yuna sat in her quiet apartment, still wearing a dress that cost more than her monthly rent, she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't angry anymore. She was disappointed in David, in herself, in the whole fairy tale illusion that had crumbled so spectacularly. The question now wasn't whether David would choose her over his old life. The question was whether she was brave enough to choose herself, to demand the kind of love that didn't waver when tested, that didn't need to be proven in ballrooms or boardrooms. Her phone buzzed one more time. David again. I'm outside your building. I know you don't want to see me, but I need to tell you something. I need to tell you what my mother would have said about tonight. Yuna's breath caught. Through her window, she could see a familiar figure standing under the streetlight, still in his tuxedo, looking up at her building with the kind of desperate hope she recognized because she'd felt it herself. The choice was hers now. Stay safe in her small world, or take one more chance on the man who'd shown her glimpses of extraordinary love before letting fear pour him back into the shadows. Yuna touched the silver cross at her throat, her grandmother's reminder that sometimes faith meant jumping even when you couldn't see where you'd land. She walked to the door, her hand hovering over the intercom button that would either begin their real love story or end it forever. The streetlight cast a pale circle of light around David as he stood outside Yuna's building, his tuxedo rumpled, his hair falling forward from hours of running his hand through it. For the first time in years, he looked less like a polished millionaire and more like a man stripped bare by his own choices. Above him, on the 4th floor, a single light glowed in a window. Yuna's window. He tilted his head back, hands jammed deep into his pockets, his breath frosting in the cool September air. When the intercom finally buzzed, David jolted like a condemned man granted a last-minute reprieve. Yes? Yuna's voice crackled through the speaker, cautious, tired. It's me. He swallowed. I know I don't deserve it, but please, just 5 minutes. A long pause. Then the lock clicked. Inside the apartment, Luna opened the door just enough for him to step inside. Her gown shimmered faintly in the dim light, but her makeup was smudged, and her bare feet looked small and vulnerable against the scuffed linoleum. David's chest ached at the sight. This was no Cinderella fantasy. This was reality. The woman who had stood beside him in boardrooms and battles, who had given him more loyalty and brilliance than he deserved. Say what you came to say, Yuna said, crossing her arms. David took a breath. You were right. About everything. About me being a coward. About me becoming exactly like my father when it mattered most. I let their approval weigh more than your dignity, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. Her eyes searched his, wary. Words, David, that's all these are. You had the chance to act, and you didn't. I know, his voice cracked. And I can't change that moment. But I can change every moment after it. He moved closer. Cautiously, as if afraid she'd bolt. When I was 16, I stood on the marble steps of our house while they carried my mother's body out in a black bag. And I promised myself I would never, ever let anyone make me feel powerless again. That's why I built walls of steel around my life. Money, status, power. They were supposed to protect me. But tonight, when you walked away, I realized something. Those walls didn't protect me. They imprisoned me. And I've been rotting inside them for 20 years. Yuna's arms dropped slowly to her sides. I should have defended you, David whispered. Not because you needed me to. You handled them better than I ever could, but because loving someone means standing with them no matter the cost. I failed you tonight. But if you let me, Yuna, I will spend the rest of my life proving I've learned my lesson. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she shook her head. And if I let you back in, David? What happens the next time they sneer? The next time they whisper? I can't live in a world where I'm constantly defending my right to exist. David stepped back, pulled out his phone, and typed rapidly. A few seconds later, Yuna's laptop pinged on the desk. She frowned and opened it, expecting another cruel headline. Instead, she saw a live broadcast David on his own social media, with millions of followers watching. Tonight, his recorded voice said, I made a mistake. I stayed silent when I should have spoken, and in doing so, I hurt the woman I love. Her name is Yuna Martinez. She is the most brilliant, compassionate, and capable person I've ever known. And if you think she doesn't belong in my world, then you're right. Because it's not her world that's unworthy, it's mine. And from this moment forward, I don't care about old money, new money, or any of the poisonous games you play. The only thing I care about is building a life with her. Yuna's hand flew to her mouth. David. He lowered the phone. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. My so-called friends will bury me for this. But I don't care. If I lose everything and still have you, it will be the first time in my life I've truly been rich. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the city outside. Yuna's heart warred with her mind. The memory of his hesitation still raw. The sight of his vulnerability pulling her closer. Do you mean it? She whispered. All of it. Every word. His voice was steady now, sure. I love you, Yuna. Not as my assistant. Not as someone I have to defend, but as the woman who showed me what it means to actually live. Her breath hitched. And for the first time all night, she let herself believe it. Slowly, she closed the distance between them and pressed her forehead to his. Don't make me regret this, David. His hands cupped her face, reverent. Never again. Their kiss was nothing like the soft promise of the boutique. It was desperate, messy, real. A kiss that burned away fear and built something stronger in its place. A week later, the gossip pages still buzzed with scandal. Richardson renounces high society for love. One headline sneered. Cinderella keeps her slipper. Another mocked. But in a small restaurant in Queens, two proud parents watched their daughter laugh with the man beside her. David Richardson, once untouchable, now sat at their table passing bowls of homemade mole as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and for the first time in years, Yuna felt no division between worlds, because true wealth, she realized, wasn't found in ballrooms or boardrooms. It was found here in the messy, ordinary, extraordinary act of choosing love over fear. Do you believe love can truly rewrite the rules of the world we live in? Or does it only reveal the courage we've had inside us all along? Thanks for watching. Do not forget to like, share and subscribe.